Welcome back. This period we're going to be drawing Charlotte in profile. We are going to begin with her cranium. And craniums are always about the same. Last period we had some trouble with a few people are still making craniums much wider than they need to be. I just want to remind you that this is our radius here, and the radius of a half circle should be the same going up and down as it is going left and right. So notice that these are both actual half circles, and the space between them is a tall, skinny rectangle, about the same proportions as a hardcover book. Okay. We're going to draw the line of the face straight down for now. We can take a couple measurements from the photograph. The brow ridge is about here, bottom of the nose is here, and the bottom of the chin is here. So are these about the same distance? Yeah, and that's what we've learned to expect, right? So if we go from the brow ridge to the bottom of the nose, which is equal to the bottom of the cranium, and we double this, that's how we know how long to make the face. And that works almost every time. So check your work if you have to. You're responsible for getting this right. Because if the jaw's too long, your drawing's going to fail. So you can double check, make sure these distances are the same, and then you know that your face isn't going to be too long. The jaw is going to angle up slightly from here and angle forward slightly from here. The ear hole is going to end up being near the bottom of this hardcover book shape. And Charlotte has great posture, so we're basically, the neck is almost straight up and down. And the ear is going to be sort of behind the ear hole. There's the lobe. And the top of her lobe is going to come down a little below her nose. Quite a bit below her nose. So let's put it a little lower. The ear hole might be a little lower too. Most people just draw the whole face, then they add the ear on at the end. That's not the best practice. The ear gives you a lot of important clues about how the head is angled. So it's good to put that in sooner rather than later. And we are going to do a block in of some of the main elements of the profile, including, see this angle, it's about 15 or 20 degrees from vertical. For the throat, it's coming down this way. The forehead angles back slightly from the brow ridge. And we are going to do a block in of the hair. So look what I'm doing here. I'm thinking of this as a big shape that I am simplifying, and I'm understanding it in terms of straight lines instead of curves. Yeah, it's like Roblox, whatever that is. So you don't have to get this exactly right, but you know what? I'm going to take a measurement today. Okay, so if I measure the face from the brow ridge to the bottom of the chin, and let me switch screens so you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to measure that distance, and I'm going to ask myself, how many faces does it take to get to the back of the ponytail? Anybody want to guess? I'm getting almost exactly 2. Why don't you try measuring it yourself? So one face gets me from the brow ridge to the back of the ear. Do you follow me? If I take this distance one time and turn it, see what have I taught you guys how to measure like this yet? This only works if your arm is fully extended and you have one eye closed. Or you can just lay your pencil right against the monitor. That's the easiest way to do it because you're working from a screen. So I'm measuring one face length, and then I turn my pencil the other way. And if I measure from the brow ridge one face length back, I get to the back of the ear. And if I measure two face lengths back, I get to almost to the back of the ponytail. So let me show you on my drawing what I just did. It's pretty simple if you understand it. So here's my face length, brow ridge to the bottom of the chin. And I measured that vertically, and then I went this way, and one face length gets me to the back of the ear. You see that? That's the same as that. And two face lengths gets me to the back of the ponytail. So that's a good way to measure how much space you need to allow for the hair. So having found that, now I have a better sense of, for blocking in the hair, I'm going to start with the ear because I already found that. I'm going to go forward a little, up a little, forward, up. And you see how much easier it is to copy this shape if it's been understood in terms of straight lines? Because we're good at seeing straight lines and we're good at seeing angles and distances. But when we see curves, it's really a lot harder to get the angle. And that's why most artists, when they're drawing a complicated form, they start by blocking it in. Now, obviously, if you're working from life, you're not going to have the advantage of these red lines that I just sketched on the photo. But that's what artists pretend they're seeing when they block something in. Notice that the apex of this point here is going to land higher than the level of the chin. So it lands about here. And to most of you, that's going to feel like too much space for the hair because most of you are, like little kids just draw like big faces with tiny amounts of hair on top. But the hair is much more dominant than that in this photograph, as I hope you can tell. And then I'm going to block in the collar. That's sort of a big diagonal that goes here to here. And this side of the collar, I'm going to understand that like this. This vertical happens behind the chin. And this way, when I start drawing the face, which I obviously haven't done yet, I'm going to have a sense of how it fits on the head. Okay. So today, for some reason, I'm teaching my intro class as a kind of advanced technique. And so pay attention here. What I'm doing today is I'm going to start this drawing not with the features, but with the shadow map. So I'm looking for where the hair falls into shadow, and it sort of falls roughly like this. And the neck falls into shadow here, and the throat falls into shadow here. And there's a little piece of shadow under the eyebrow. And we are going to start our drawings today by just shadow mapping those areas and doing a first shading. And as I just explained in the last video I did this morning, the advantage of that is we're going to be looking for a pattern of darks and lights that corresponds with the motif before we place any features in there. And remember, I'm left-handed. You're going to shade the other direction if you're right-handed. Very lightly. Little shadow along the back of the neck. And if I'm doing a professional portrait, this is usually how I'm going to approach it. I'm going to block in some really basic shadow shapes before I commit to features. Because you can see right now, if you look back and forth between my drawing, as unfinished as it is, if you look back and forth between here and the photo, your brain's going to start to recognize a pattern. It doesn't have any information yet about the face, but if you can recognize the pattern, you know that the overall proportions are pretty good. And if you learn to approach it this way, you're going to avoid all the major mistakes in proportion that beginners tend to make. Can you get that sense? You just glance back and forth between your drawing and my drawing and see if it's a similar pattern. If it's not, it's really easy to adjust right now because you haven't committed to any details at all. Okay, I'm going to take a look at your work, and I'll be right back. Okay, here we go. It's time we're done with the block-in. So we can erase these construction lines. We're just going to put one construction line back. This artists call this a plumb line. If you're ever posing for a professional artist for a portrait, you might see them holding up a string with a weight on the end of it, and they close one eye and they're looking at you and they're like relating your form to this vertical. You don't have to do that right now because I just did it for you. I just put that red line down Charlotte's face. So we're going to start by, so we know where the brow ridge is. Here's the indent under the brow ridge. And we're going to zoom in now. And we're just focusing on what happens around this line. So notice we go a little behind the line. And then we slope forward at about 35 degrees from vertical. We know the nose is going to end here. We've marked, so let's mark where it ends. And we know it's going to end out in front of this line. And we could also gauge, like, here's the indent. Let's see. Here's the indent under the brow ridge. Here's the very bottom of the nose. And here's the tip of the nose. Notice the tip is about a third of the way up. Okay? So find this point, mark about a third of the way up. That's where the nose is going to change direction. And you can also start thinking about the shape that's created, the radius of this circle, right? That's something we've talked about. So it's a medium-sized circle that we could fit in the tip of the nose. So let's draw the circle very lightly. And then we're coming around, we're turning the corner here. And then we are angling down at probably about 30 degrees. You see that? And then we're ending way out in front of this line. Remember, the philtrum has thickness. Okay. Now, let's take one more measurement. You should remember by now, I hope, that the line between the lips is usually 1/3 of the way down from the bottom of the nose, which is here, to the bottom of the chin, which is here. And you can see that that's almost exactly 1/3. You see that? These units are all the same. I think some elementary school teachers teach it a little differently, that it's halfway down. Make sure that you break that habit because it's only 1/3 of the way down. So we're like right there. And once we know where the line between the lips is, notice that the philtrum is very straight and it's following parallel to the line of the face. And then we're curving under for this line between the lips. Then we're coming almost back to the line of the face. We have a small half circle for the bottom lip. And then we're kind of hugging the line of the face. And then we've got a large radius curve for the chin that comes out slightly past the line of the face. And it would be it's always useful to check your work by checking the facial angle, which is the line that goes from the tip of the nose to the tip of the chin, and also checking whether or not you have the right negative shape between the facial angle and the profile. So we've talked a little bit about negative shapes. We're looking at this shape right here, and we are trying to achieve a similar shape right here in our drawing. Can you see that negative shape right there? I don't like to use negative shapes to construct my work, but I like to use them to check my work. It's a big difference. Drawing is kind of boring if you're always looking for negative shapes, but if you're not sure you did something right, they're very useful. Okay, now we're going to bring that line between the lips a little bit behind the line of the face. Fairly straight, not a very sharp, pronounced Cupid's bow on this model. And there's a little tiny line to show that there's a slight overlap between the cheek and the back of the mouth. And now we're going to rely on our angle measuring skills. Anybody want to help me with this angle? What does that look like? Come on, 45. So that's the line of the nostril. It's a little steeper than the bottom of the nose. This was about 35. We're about 10 degrees steeper. So be true to that angle and make sure you put it high enough so you can fit the nostril and with enough space of flesh showing between the nostril and the bottom of the nose. Then we're going to curve around for the ala when we come to the back of this form. And I'm going to go to a broken line here to show the plane change of the ala, like that. Most of Charlotte's nostril is out in front of her philtrum, not quite centered exactly above the philtrum. Okay, remember last time I had you put those pencils into this indentation? So that tells you where the eye is going to go. So here's where the pencil would sit if you were putting it there, and your eye level, Charlotte, goes right under the pencil. So just to be sure we get this right, let's just draw the pencil and draw eye level right there. And we can check our work. That eye level should end up being halfway up the face. So, yeah, I feel good about that. If I zoom out, we can take that measurement if you want. Here's the bottom of the chin. Here's eye level. There's the top of the skull. So this distance and this are the same. I'm going to measure. You can measure, but yeah, those are the same. So we know where eye level is. Our next question is how far back to put the eye. We could use an angle to help us. We've already put a lot of attention to drawing the slope of the nose. Notice that these two lines are about parallel if we go from the... So if we continue the slope of the nose back, that's going to give us the top of the eyelid. The eyelid is right behind this little pencil we drew, so the eyelid has to be about here. Don't put the eye too far forward on the head. That's a very common error that people make. And the back of the eye, if I start right at the back of the nostril and go parallel, that's about where the back of the eye is supposed to end up. So that gives me some idea. Notice I'm using a really light touch to place these details because I'm not sure about them yet. I like to leave myself with a little bit of room to play around here. I'm going to do a little bit of shading for the eyebrow. That's going to help me read this area correctly. And let's take a look at what we can see of the eye here. So this is what I keep talking about. I want you to study it in detail. See, here's the front of the eyelid, and here's the front of the eye. You see how far away they are from each other? So if you draw the lid out here, you've got to put the eyeball way back here. And you can also just barely make out in this photograph the thing I was talking about with the pupil is not in the front of the iris, it's in the back. So you want to do that too. And you'll also notice this slope here is just a little steeper for the lower lid than the slope of the upper lid. And I don't think I've really talked about that yet, but let me demonstrate. Here's the eyeball. If we draw the entire ball, and here's your iris and the pupil. Notice that the top of the iris is usually covered by the lid, and the bottom isn't. So this angle ends up being a little closer to horizontal than this one, which is a little steeper. You follow that? So a lot of people think that we're actually looking more like at something more symmetrical. So they draw it too far like this, but it's actually like this. Okay, we're going to give her some eyelashes. And a little bit of lower lash. And a little bit of shading under the lid. The white of the eye is not white. We're not doing a coloring book. We're doing a value study, so we're going to shade the white of the eye slightly. And while we're nice and zoomed in, we are going to shade the nose as well. So we were about to do a little shading of the bottom of the nose. So I'm going to shadow map the ala. The shadow map goes like that. and the shadow map of the tip of the nose. And a lot of people really don't pay close attention to shadow shapes. They are just as important as the shapes of the forms themselves. Here's my first shading on both of these shapes. And my second shading is going to go a little darker on the cast shadow and just a little darker through the cores of the form shadows. Now, I don't know if you can see what I'm seeing here, but I'm seeing, you see this darkening right here? That's the core of the form shadow. That's where we're turning away from the light, but we're not yet reaching the reflected light. There's another one along here. They're very subtle. I'm going to exaggerate them a little bit because it's going to make the forms look a little rounder. So I'm going a little bit in there and a little bit through here. Just a few touches is all it takes to really bring out the roundness of the form, which you can only get with those reflected lights. There's a little bit of a plane change right here for the curve of the cheek. Don't go too hard on that. It's very subtle. And no shadow here. Don't get confused. This is not shadow. If you start putting a shadow here, it's going to really mess you up. And here we've got a little bit of darkening of the upper lip. And also the upper lip is casting a shadow onto the lower lip like that. Remember, this is human face is the hardest thing in the world to draw, not because it's actually hard, but because you're going to make little tiny mistakes, and then it's not going to look like her, and you're going to get frustrated. That same thing happens to me. But that's why this is such a valuable exercise. Right along here, we have a very faint plane change, which we're going to show with the lightest possible hatching line. And now we're going to back out and we're going to study the beautiful reflected light under the jaw. So we already did like a quick shadow map here. This is where our sphere shading technique comes into play because we're shading across this edge. This is why a couple people remarked that the class was getting a little boring with drawing all the spheres. Spheres and cylinders have to be so easy before you can successfully do what I'm doing right now, which is shading a rounded facial form with a nice hatching technique. So someone who may have been Charlotte just remarked, it looks like a beard. So this is important. Your brain knows how to make sense of light and shadow. When you first start shading any drawing, the whole drawing is very light. So your brain thinks, oh, this is there's a floodlight pouring over this whole thing, right? That's what your brain interprets. Then you put your first shadow in, your brain still thinks there's a floodlight over the whole face, but your brain interprets this as a kind of a beard. So that's what's happening. When you put in the rest of the shadows, then your brain understands what's going on and it stops looking like a beard. I've had so many students who do a beautiful job of shading their first couple of shadows, and then they erase them. And I say, why'd you erase that? And they say, oh, well, it looked like a beard. It looked like dirt. Because your brain can't interpret it as a shadow until your brain sees all the other shadows, at which point it's going to look like a shadow. Okay. One great thing about this photograph, as opposed to the one that I did of Judah last period, was we can actually see the forms of Charlotte's ear. Notice that her nose is pretty petite, so the ear is going pretty much as far down as the top of the upper lips. So we're going to bring that lobe down to about here. And the top of the ear is right where we expect it to be, level with the top of the eye. And the ear tilts back towards the back of the head, just like we expect. We already blocked it in, but now I'm taking that block in and I'm refining it in terms of curves. So much easier if the block in is there, really hard if the block in is not there. Now, remember, you're going to have to know how to draw an ear from memory before you're allowed to start your own self-portraits, so pay attention. We have a very small tragus here, and equally small antitragus opposite the tragus. Then we're going to skip ahead to the helix. We're going to put the pencil right in the center of the ear. We're going to curve forward and up and around. And see what happens when we get to the back of the helix. It starts to change into a little groove. And we show that groove with these little hatching marks. And the groove on Charlotte continues all the way down underneath the tragus, pretty much almost to the right into the earlobe. Okay, this is the step that is the hardest for people to get right, so draw along with me, please. We are going to go from the top of the antitragus. We're going to curve around and forward, and we disappear behind the helix. And here's the shadow under that's called the antihelix. There's the shadow under the antihelix. There's the shadow of the ear hole, around the ear hole. And finally, buried under the hair, you can sort of see this depression here. It's another groove called the triangular fossa that goes through the top of the antihelix. Again, don't get discouraged. You're going to have a much harder time drawing these things than I am. That's normal, but when you I'm trying to show you just how easy it is if you understand the forms. I don't know why. It's a funny thing about being an art teacher, and I apologize if you heard me say this before, but if you were taking guitar lessons and your teacher couldn't play a series of complex chords that you didn't know how to play, you'd probably be pissed and you'd get a new guitar teacher. You'd be like, you should know how to do this. But I sometimes have students who are just annoyed with me that I know how to draw better than they do. That's what you want in a teacher. So the fact that I make some of this look easy sometimes, it should not be annoying. You should be glad that you have someone teaching you who knows what they're doing. And if you stick with it, it'll get this easy for you. Or easier, because you're getting a head start on me. I didn't start training seriously in drawing until my mid-20s. And trust me, it was a lot harder to learn at that age than it's going to be for you guys. Exactly. Your brains are a lot more malleable. Your brains have something in them called myelin, which you basically stop making after you're old enough to vote. So It's like a really big deal to every minute of your life right now is such a precious chance for you to build the brain you're going to be stuck with for the rest of your life. And you don't want to just have a brain that's good at playing dumb video games that are not going to be around in 20 years. Because life is long. Okay, so I already did my first shading of the hair. Let me just zoom out a little. So basically, I created this boundary, and everything on this side of the boundary has to be lighter than everything on this side. So when you're working down here, you can press pretty hard. We're not trying to draw the head like one hair at a time. We are just trying to like look for shapes of dark. I think of them as flame shapes. You see what I'm doing? And I'm not copying them exactly. I'm just getting the right feel of these darks that kind of spread up into this knot of hair, and these other darks that spread down, go in the other direction. And as I just told the last class, the two most common questions I get from students are, how do you draw hair and how do you draw trees? Like, in other words, trees that have leaves on them. And the answer really in both cases is you just can't. You can't draw, you just can't draw every hair, and you can't draw every leaf. What you have to do when you're confronted with such complex forms is you have to radically simplify them. And the way you do that is by studying the simplifications of other artists and picking something you like. So the way I simplify it is one way. There's a million other ways to do it. I'm looking for big shapes of dark. The biggest, most common error, though, that beginners make when they're trying to draw hair is very simple. They again get that coloring book mindset, and they're like, oh, I'm going to use the brown crayon for the hair, and they make it all the same value. And hair is shinier than skin. Not just greasy hair or wet hair. Like, all hair it has more shimmer and luster than skin. It's more reflective, and that means it's more contrasty than skin. And so if you put more contrast in your skin than you put in your hair's going to be dead and lifeless. So you want to really push hard on some of these darks in the hair, like you see me doing right here. And then when you move into the light side of the hair, you want to use a much lighter touch. And you just want to be barely touching the paper. Use your lightest, that's that thing again of dynamic pressure, dynamic control. Like the piano player has to play the really delicate passage and then really pound the keys for the next passage. That's what this is about. You see how light I'm touching this light side of the hair? I'm still defining some of the forms, and I'm showing a little bit of the habit of the hair's growth, but I'm doing it with a very light touch. And then when I get into the shadow side, I'm pressing as hard as I can. And if you take one of my college level classes, you'll be doing this darker stuff with softer pencils. But we're just using a number 2 pencil today, so we're just going to press hard. There are a lot of drawings done with very nice, expensive pencils that are terrible, and there are a lot of drawings that are done with good old number 2 school pencils that are gorgeous. You don't want to get too hung up on having the right materials, because it matters a lot less than just practice and knowing what you're doing. This is great practice for what you're going to be doing, which is drawing yourselves in a front view and a side view. Charlotte, you're going to have to do it on your own next time. But we're going to do some more practice. If we have willing students, we can do a little more practice. So we're going to end this drawing the way we started it. We're going to step back, which for me means zooming out. And we're looking again for the overall pattern of light and dark. That was how we started the drawing, that's how we finish it. And notice the further back I get, the more easy it is to see ways that these two patterns are different. Are you seeing it too? Like I made the top of her head way too flat. Can you see that? So I'm going to correct that. Because I have a camera on my drawing, I can zoom out without stepping back. You guys have to step back from your work. And it doesn't matter if your drawing gets perfect today, but what does matter, what I expect is that you learn like, oh yeah, this is how I can fix a drawing. I have to step back from it. I have to study it from a little bit of a distance. And if I do that, things are going to be revealed to me that I'm not able to see close up. I mean, with all the practice I have, there's certain things that I totally missed because I was letting myself stay too zoomed in on the details. This ponytail comes up and out a little further, almost off my page. I can see that as part of this pattern. Okay, so I'm almost done here. We have a few more minutes. I'm going to focus on this the cast shadow on this collar. Don't worry about this if you're not caught up. Just try to catch up. But notice that this is a great example of how a cast shadow edge can really show the form. You see how this cast shadow is falling over the curves of this collar? And I'm going to copy that pattern, and what that's going to do for me is it's going to create that kind of pillowy look of that collar as it folds around on itself. And then I'm going to go and do a second shading right in here, hatching the way that form is curving, and another one down here. And I'm even going to just cheat in a little bit of core shadow on here, even though I'm not sure I'm seeing it, but just to get a little sense of the roundness of these sort of sausage-like forms. And zoom out a little more. These are not beauty shots. These are not your yearbook pictures. These are mug shots. This is a purely analytical drawing. We're just trying to understand the forms. And what you're going to find is that the forms are much easier to read in a side view, relatively hard to read from the front. But if you have studied them from the side and you understand them from the side, then you're going to have a much better chance from succeeding from the front. There's one other little kind of hack I want to teach you. This profile of the nose was feeling a little bit off to me. So when I erase it, I can still see where it was before. And my feeling was I needed to make it a little rounder on the top of the curve. So it's kind of useful that I can still see that old contour when I put the new one in. And that feels better to me. I also want you to notice that if I zoom in all the way, my correction here, see there's the old line, there's the new one, probably about a 32nd of an inch. Literally, like it's barely anything, but to me, that somewhat improved the likeness. One other correction I'm going to make is just dropping. I had this coming up a little too high. It made her look a little too happy. And I'm just going to drop that little line down again about a 16th of an inch. I'm going to throw a little shadow right under here to define the bottom lip. And that's probably going to do it. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes to finish, then I'm going to collect your work and show it to my YouTube audience if you are willing. Again, put your name near your drawing if you want the world to see that you did it, and don't put your name near your drawing if you would rather remain anonymous. Okay, here's the fun part. We're going to look at student work again. And I'm not going to say names. Some artists, exceptional job, thank you. To their drawings than others. This again is an intro to drawing class. These students have only been studying with me for a couple months. And we are just starting the face unit, so they haven't done too much practice yet. What I want you to notice in the class is that when you see your drawing on the screen, right next to the photograph, it's going to be easier to see the little ways that you may have, little errors that you may have made that were not as clear to you when you were working on the drawings. Part of that is also a factor of just time, because after you haven't looked at something for a few minutes, it's much easier to see little errors that you may have made as well. But overall, this is a super impressive group of drawings, especially for an intro class. Okay. One thing to pay attention to is line quality. Some drawings, we want our darkest darks to be in where the shadows are, and you can run into trouble. This is a beautifully constructed drawing. When the line quality along a contour like this, which is in full light, gets so heavy, it's a little distracting. And I don't want to nitpick, but just also be aware on this drawing, the front of the eye is coming all the way out to the front of the eyelid. So you see how it looks like the eye's projecting a little bit too far out. Okay, that's a very delicate little study. And very good. So Trevor, you did a great job on the features. I think your biggest error is when we measured this distance, remember that one face length should have brought us to the back of the ear. Your ear's like really crowding the face. Can you see that? That space is a little too tight. That's very nice. Awesome. Okay. Gotta back up a little bit. That's improvement. And finally, the self-portrait of the artist. Okay, I'm going to hang on to these. Yes, I did. I showed them all. It even had your YouTube handle on it, Via. Okay. So thanks for sharing your work, everyone, and thanks everyone at home for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.